I'm Luke Poush, and this is my presentation on the composer Franz Lizst. Franz Lizst was the first ever rock star. He achieved massive fame across many lands. Franz was so electrifying on the piano he could practically put women into a trance. This man had a prodigious career and impact on the world of music forever. First, we'll look at the humble beginnings of the Lizst family to better understand his origins. Next, we will discover where he attained his masterful skills on the piano. Then, we will discuss the career of this legend as well as the romance that accompanied it. We will take a look at two incredible pieces by Franz and his inspiration for each of them. And finally, we will look at the last part of his life and his later years and what impact those had. Franz Lizst was born in the backwoods of Austria, on the border of Hungary in 1811. His parents were Anna Lizst, who was the daughter of a baker, and in the future she would take care of Franz's 3 illegitimate children. And his father's name was Adam. He was an accountant and an amateur musician at that, whose dreams were never realized. That is, until his son came along. Franz was an only child, so his father had time to pour into his musical genius. His parents could tell from a young age that he had a gift, and they cultivated that gift into something beautiful. In 1822, Franz was now 11 years of age. At this point, Franz's musical genius was evident, and his father wanted to make sure that he got the exposure that he needed. And that wouldn't happen in the small town of Rating, Austria. So the family picked up, and they moved to the big city, Vienna. Here, he was introduced to and trained under some incredible composers of the day. Franz learned music composition from none other than Antonio Salieri, and Carl Czerny trained him in piano technique. Salieri was Mozart's great rival and tormentor. Even so, he was a musical genius, and learning from him gave the young Franz the knowledge to back up his evident skills at the piano. And Czerny was a student of Beethoven himself. So when I was doing my research on Franz and his education, I came to realize just how connected all of these famous composers were. So many of them knew each other personally, and I didn't realize that before. I had them all compartmentalized. In my mind, they all existed in different worlds. But I can see now that even today, there are so many popular music artists, and many of them know each other. They collaborate and they make things together. I guess they did the same thing back in the day. They also have rivalries, just like many composers did, and it all just kind of blew my mind. People are the same as they've always been. Music may sound different, but people never change. Something else blew my mind as well, and that is the fact that both of these excellent and famous composers taught Franz free of charge. To me, this didn't make a whole lot of sense. I mean, it's cool that they saw that kind of potential in this 11-year-old sickly-looking child, but I just couldn't comprehend a musical celebrity doing this in the 21st century. I don't think that people still do this, but I might be wrong. I feel like these important people wouldn't have enough time to teach some kid, and there were a lot of child prodigies back in that day, even in the city of Vienna where the Lizst family moved. What's also great about this is that since he was taught for free, he kind of returned the favor when he got old. He had a lot of students that he taught for free as well, and I guess maybe that was a product of the day where they would do that. It's just hard for me to comprehend how they had their job and how they had their family time and how they had their own composing time and then have time for random students. I'm not sure what level of students that he would teach. They must have been like prodigies, I guess. Someone worth teaching, but it's still pretty cool that he taught him for free in my mind. So what's cool about Franz's teacher Czerny is that Czerny was learning under Beethoven himself, and he had access to him. And Czerny wanted to show off his prized student prodigy to him. And eventually Beethoven agreed to listening to the child play, even though he had heard dozens of child prodigies play. And he was basically completely deaf at this point. So now he heard Franz play, and it has been said that he was so moved that he leaned forward and he kissed the young boy on his forehead in admiration. And that might be a legend, but it still shows that Beethoven really thought highly of this young boy, and he saw something in him. And I think that's pretty cool. And it's interesting to me that it seems that if you want to get famous, you have to attach yourself to these famous people. You have to be in contact with somebody who's in contact with the famous person. Like, they all know each other. And it just seems like they all ride on each other's coattails to fame. Nobody just becomes famous purely by themselves. They need to be attached to something that people already know, which is kind of interesting to me. You can't make it on your own purely alone. So, Adam Lizst moved the family to Paris, France. Here, Franz could really make it big. Adam tirelessly promoted his son, and this was at a detriment to his health. Because, spoiler alert, he ended up dying. But before that, the Lizst family ended up moving in next to an incredible piano maker by the name of Sebastian Erard. This man saw the raw talent of the young Franz and wanted him to be the poster child for selling his pianos. This was the perfect opportunity. Wherever Franz played, Erard would provide him with a grand piano to play on. Father and son toured France, Germany, and Great Britain. And after touring for 3 tireless years straight, as father and son, Franz's dad, Adam, contracted typhoid fever and died a quick death. And Franz was only 16 years old. So Franz doesn't handle his father's death very well. In fact, he goes through a period where he's an alcoholic, and then he flip-flops and wants to join the priesthood and give up music altogether, but he's persuaded not to. He ends up getting caught up in some cultish thinking of St. Simonism, which is heavily focused on science being blended with religion and the redistribution of wealth, amongst other things, socialist ideas mixing with religion. And St. Simon's view of religion is encompassed in this quote that I got from Botanica.com. It said, "I should guide the community towards the great aim of improving as quickly as possible the conditions of the poorest class." Sorry, I'm a theology major, and I was just kind of interested in that and what kind of belief systems that Franz held. I think that's important. Back on the subject of Franz's career, he also came to know yet another famous composer named Frédéric Chopin. A quote from an online source called the Hungarian Review said, "They often appeared together in concerts and as part of events organized for charity, and their performances were always the center of attention. Reviews refer to them as the 2 greatest virtuosos of the day." That's pretty cool. They were kind of like frenemies, though. They had a love-hate relationship. But from what I read in their letters to each other, it seemed pretty friendly. Here's one of the letters. It's from Chopin. It says, "I hardly even know what my pen is scribbling, since at the moment Lizst is playing one of my etudes and distracting my attention from my respectable thoughts. I'd love myself to acquire from him the manner in which he plays my etudes. And I don't know if that's admiration or envy, but I think it might be a little bit of both. In Paris, France, Franz became enchanted by Countess Marie d'Elgoul. She was already married, so this was scandalous. She was also 7 years older than him. When they found out that she was going to have a child, they eloped to Switzerland. And out of his passion, he wrote this first piece that I'm going to discuss, and that is A Lac de Wallenstadt. He wrote this music when he was traveling in Switzerland and seeing all the nature and art that it had to offer. Marie wrote this in reference to his song. She said, "The shores of the lake of Wallenstadt kept us for such a long time. Franz wrote there for me a melancholy harmony, imitative of the sigh of the waves and the cadence of oars, which I have never been able to hear without weeping." And this is that song. You can hear what she was describing. It's very beautiful indeed. Now, I will close with the final piece, probably Franz's most notable and famous work. You might have already heard it at the beginning of this video, played by Adam Weeks, but he was being facetious. This piece is called Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2 in C-sharp minor. The title may be misleading because, rather than being Hungarian, the opening theme is Romanian. In my paper, I describe the intricacies of the piece itself. The first half is seen as Lausanne, and the second half is Friska. This kind of music can be recognized even now, after being composed a couple hundred years ago. It is not only played in concert halls, it is played on the television, on kids' cartoon shows such as Tom and Jerry, and I added the link in my paper to the video. So Franz Lizst was a prodigy from the start. He lived his life with a passion, expressed through his insane piano skills. He came in contact with some of the greats and eventually became the greatest of his time. His musical career was enchanting, and so was his romantic life. Lizst composed incredible piano pieces that have been celebrated for centuries and are still played today. The end of his life was in contrast to his eccentric younger years, and he composed incredible church music. This man left his mark on history, and it was a pleasure to better understand his life journey and impact on the world of music.